I'm just going to now briefly say a few words about BERMAC, which is the center that's hosting this talk and this project. So BERMAC is the Center for Interdisciplinary Research in Media and Culture at Birkbeck College, University of London, and it is located within the School of Arts, which is where I'm sitting today. It's physically located at 43 Gordon Square in Bloomsbury, but we've, for obvious reasons, been doing quite a lot of stuff online lately. It's co-directed by my colleague Rebecca Cupid, who could not be here this evening, who is also a lecturer in film, media, cultural studies, and myself. As the name says it, interdisciplinary studies, BERMAC is really the home of research for our entire department, which encompasses many different areas within media and culture, including film, journalism, television, digital culture, arts policy and management, etc. So we really are very interdisciplinary, and we also collaborate with other organizations and groups on a number of research strands of this, and this being one of them. So before we launch into the project itself, I just want to once again thank everybody that's made this project possible and these panels possible. So first of all, Center for Human Rights and the Arts at Bard College, who as part of the Open Society University Network funded me to organize this group and this process. And then we partnered up with Art Monthly magazine and also Electra, and all this is happening under the auspices of BERMAC. So lots of partners and kind of lots of collaborations already within the project. And also just to thank Kat Black, who is the research assistant on the project, who's been kind of keeping everything running smoothly. So I'm now, this is like my third introduction. I'm going to introduce the project itself, the panel, and then finally the panelists. So, okay, the project and others. The Gendered Practices and Politics of Art Collectives is a project that started gradually in 2019. And when I was researching artist collectives in the former Yugoslavia, and the project began from those particular collectives, mostly in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And some observations that I came across made me want to research collectivity on a much broader, in a much broader way and a broader scale. Namely, the fact that collectives, even when they are critical, progressive, radical, promising some form of emancipation, promising some form of a different way of doing things, often tend to reproduce the forms of oppression that they're actually critiquing. And to be very concrete about this, the way I came across this and saw this is that in the collectives that I was looking at, often we would see images of groups involved in participatory collaborative works, be it video, be it performance, be it any other form. But the crediting and the way that these collectives ended up being historicized, written about, talked about, predominantly had and has a list of male members. And I was very curious about who these kind of invisible women were in these collective practices, where they were they artists, were they authors, were they sort of, you know, passers-by? Obviously not, because a lot of this work is rehearsed, is planned, is organized. So I began to research this through a series of interviews, but then I felt that methodologically I was more interested in honing down the questions than focusing on individual narratives. So I really wanted to develop a methodology, I think, to think about collectivity, because I think we really need to work on our methodologies when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about revisiting, kind of feminist revisiting of art histories, when we talk about decolonizing, I think we need to work on methodologies. So it's all well and good to have this intention, but the question is, how do we do it? Are we asking the right questions? So with that in mind, I kind of wanted to ask some questions that emerged, and these were questions about the ways in which these practices were unfolding. So questions around reproduction and formation of networks. So how are networks, collectives, groups formed in the first place? How are those networks then reproduced? So how do they then continue and grow and change? questions of value. How are different forms of labor valued within group work, collective work, and what kind of remains outside of the way that we think about those groups when we look back. So what are the forms of labor that are supporting this collective work, the making of art, the creation of networks, what's kind of behind the scenes, so to speak. So forms of social reproduction, forms of administration, maintenance, all of this work that it takes, as we all know, to make things happen in creative practice. So I was kind of studying and researching studies of collectivity, feminist histories, the theories, the social reproduction theory, different decolonial methods, and really I wanted to kind of bring them together, and I felt that these different sort of methodologies and spheres of research are not in a way talking to each other. So my idea was to kind of research collectivity through collectivity by inviting, as it turned out, 17 participants to, for 2 months, be in conversation with each other asynchronously. So we've been speaking to each other in 4 different discussions, kind of tackling these questions in different groups. For about 2 months now, we've been conversing in a format or in a software called Framapad, which is very much like Google Docs, discussing specific topics in 4 different panels. Now we come to this panel, which is entitled "Is Ephemerality Freedom?" And this is really something that emerges perhaps most closely from my curatorial practice. And it kind of comes from the hypothesis that I had, that I sort of presented to the panelists and our conversation partners, which is that I felt a kind of disciplinary shift between working with artists coming from practices where collaboration and participation is intrinsic to the work. So practices of performance, sound-based practices, perhaps also theater and dance, but I've been less involved in that. And so I had this question: does the object and the structures around it that enable, circulation of artworks, does that change the process? So this relationship between medium and process. So we've been talking about these kind of questions. We talked a lot about event scores. We talked about longevity of projects and collaborations and sort of working together. But I won't go too much into what we actually discussed, because that's what this panel is about. So I would just like to now finally introduce our panelists, and then ask each of the panelists to kind of talk a little bit about how their practice relates to the questions of this project. And then secondly, about this experience of this kind of coming together and discussing on the Framapad for the last 2 months. So with us this evening, we have Ximena Alarcón, who is a sound artist and researcher, and also a deep listening tutor. And I hope we hear a little bit about this. Zoran Pantelic, who is a member of kuda.org and a founder of kuda.org. Zoran is an artist, producer, curator, and program director or program editor at kuda.org. And kuda.org is a wonderful organization based in Novi Sad in Serbia. It's a center, a media center, and a collective and a platform that enables a whole range of research projects. We have Irene Revell, who is a curator and writer working predominantly with artists across sound, text, performance, and moving image. And Marina Rosenfeld, who is a composer and artist based in Brooklyn in New York. So that's very brief introductions. So if we could go in the order that I introduced you. So Ximena, if you could start by just saying, what is the connection with your practice and how this has been?
Thank you, Lina. So yes, my practice has been for many years listening to what I call listening to migrations, which is kind of these resonances that are left in between geographies and cultures. And to access to that, what I have called the in-between space, I have used deep listening practice and telematic sonic performances. With all these practices, particularly deep listening, but also technology, I have noticed that naturally people people come together. So people like to, after the experience, to continue practicing, and it creates very intimate links between people. And the research that I had, the latest research I had was the creation of a system which is called Intimal for relational listening, working with technologies, but more kind of with the body. And in that process, I engaged a group of Colombian migrant women in Europe, specifically listening to their migrations. So I follow with them the process, the deep listening process, and then we had a performance. It was more about walking, more than this relationship that we have. It was more about the full body. And this is how the collective emerged, and how this link with this project here. After the project finished, I've been trying to continue what happened there, because they wanted to continue, and there are more and more details about it that hopefully unfold as the panel goes. Yes, so in terms of the work here, with the Pramapad in the conversations, it has been a great opportunity to respond to the questions, Lina, and to share the experience and read others' experiences, and actually to realize that there are links. So all these kind of, let's say, struggle and questions that I've been kind of talking to myself, but also talking to the women in the collective, that are not just because of us, but is part of a big kind of system of questions and possibilities, and the engagement with methods that is, as you said, I think perfectly right, is about the process, how the process changed with this maybe performance or improvisation. So yes, so it's a virtual collective. This is what I can say now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ximena. Zoran, do you want to go next?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lina, for inviting me to be a part of this program, and hello to everyone. I'm Zoran Pantelic, coming from Kuda.org organization from Novi Sad. And just briefly, then I'm coming from visual arts. And during the 90s, I was already being in a collective Absolutno, which was starting to deal with new media stuff. Standing for myself when I'm talking, it's more like a stepping out from this material sculpture or the material what I studying and starting my career, and realizing then this model of tools of free software start to be very interesting for us as a specific tool in a language of media pluralism, what we starting to produce in the 90s. Of course, then the wartime in Yugoslavia was actually pretty much shaped the corridor of our own projects, and through that production, we actually find out then the being just an art collective presenting something on exhibitions was not enough. So just the opposite when Ximena now mentioned, we tried to find it kind of looking for the physical infrastructure, which means then people could actually find a place to meet each other, to create something what is actually later on come up as a formal name of lab or lounge or some physical space, then people could actually gather together, exchanging ideas. And so since then, we actually start to slightly transform the operation of art group Absolutno to Kuda.org, like a specific physical infrastructure and human infrastructure, how we call it. And since the beginning of 2000, we actually start to be open platform for collaboration. And sometimes we work as a author of the project as a collective. Sometimes we are working as a supporter. Sometimes in cooperation or co-production. So it's many different positions in processes of doing some research, or depends what will be the phenomenon or the primary aim of the process. So since the 90s, we already start to practice this. Then Group Absolutno was starting to sign as a group without personal names. And we actually basically keep it this strategy. Then Kuda.org, it's also been kind of collective label for the production of what we actually done. So it's also interesting question with the multitude of relations what we had in 20 years of cooperation. We find out very interesting how people actually react on it, and some of them are like to be covered on this kind of process being together with us. Sometimes it's also legitimized, to being, properly name it as a specific cooperation in the processes. And we find it's totally fine for us, because through these processes, for us, it's mainly the major structure. It's finding what is the precise role of the art in the society, and specifically for us in the state, which is actually create this struggling transmission from socialism to capitalism. All these issues which is come up through privatization, then the gentrification, then all these migrations and other aspects which is just overlapping and making more and more complexity in a process of time where we are living that. And through all these issues, then we would like to keep it this process as a major fire in a way. Then through these processes, finding up and changing the direction sometimes. And we find out it's also up to the participants. Some processes not necessarily to guide it or to moving just to the precise aim. It's sometimes good to find and our mission is actually, especially now in this precarious time, finding time for play, not to having a precise aim to managing or to presenting or being present or exhibit on some exhibitions. It's more like a interesting spot of exchanging, and especially in multidisciplinary processes, to inspire each other. And this is something that we find out as extremely important in this common time of commercialization of education, and less place for improvising stuff. And it's just following this punishment, like a pushment of the technology. Then everything has to be from A to B as soon as possible. So we try to find some kind of extra space for gathering together. And this is something that we
Zoran, if you could maybe say a few words about the Framapad. I'm just conscious of the time. We'll come back to more about the practice.
Thank you. Sorry, and thank you. Yeah, it's basically one of the tools what you use. It's also very interesting that all participants could actually appear, and this is extra level of participating and to work together. And I think this is really really important thing. Then everyone who is following the discussion could also later on taking a role in editing process and post-production of the whole product. And I think it's really cool stuff then to managing and to keeping this collectivist in the frame of the whole project. And I like it very much.
Thank you. Irene.
So I guess in all my work over the last sort of 20 years or so as a curator, but also more widely maybe a cultural producer, I started out more in sort of DIY punk cultures. I always prefer to collaborate with people. That feels very intuitive to me, and I think that's the sort of social aspect is something maybe we'll get onto. But some of that work has been in more formal collectives, or sort of more formalized, others less so. but in the sort of most acute relationship, I guess, I have to this question of collectivity is through more recent research around a historical moment in the 70s. My PhD thesis was looking at a particular collection of text scores called Women's Work that was produced by the Fluxus artist Alison Knowles and the composer Renee Lockwood. And through writing a sort of expanded history of that project and the sort of related practices, communities of practice, I came to this sort of particular interest in collectivity, which is around the negotiation of the individual and the group, which becomes very, very formalized in the case of scores. And also for me as a curator working with them, in a way, I kind of want to say I was almost broken by that, because it produces this acute crisis where you can exhibit this material or you can produce performances, but the really interesting process of negotiation that happens in the production of a performance, to me, is the most interesting parts of the works. And one of the things that came out of this for me was developing the workshop as a curatorial format to work through these kinds of historical materials. So maybe I'll stop there and answer the question about the process with the Ephemerpad, which would I'm curious, Lina, something you said at the sort of more like the outset, that some people were very enthusiastic about this process and other people were sort of horrified by it. Because to me it felt like a very natural way of working, and I don't really have anything to add to what you said at the outset, which is, I guess there's a frustration when you talk about these topics, that the sort of they become topics, the means of talking about them is sort of, that there's no questioning of infrastructures or structures. And so it's really exciting to start to think methodologically about how you address these things, both contemporary and historical.
Great, thank you. I will say more later about the different responses to this invitation. If there's time, I'll say something. But over to Marina.
Okay, hi, hello everybody. Greetings from New York. Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here. I'm a composer or an artist working with music and its intersection with other forms. Just in brief, my work, which can take the form of performance, as well as image, object, sometimes video, explores something like the material traces of sensory experience, especially through sound and its mise en scène, which is often called music. I'm interested in things like sound systems and distortions, power distortions, signal flow, acoustic and perceptual architectures, improvisation, and other novel or speculative social arrangements that can be enacted through music. And then some more esoteric considerations, like actually working at the moment on sort of the idea of the body of the musician, or the sexed body in music, things like that. So I think that I'm here, my collaboration with Lina goes way back. And actually my first important work, let's say, was a kind of accident of, an accident in the sense that it persists as a work in the world. And that is a work I made while still a student in 1993, originally as a one-off, but it, like I said, it's still out there, and it's called the Sure Frost Orchestra. And this was a piece where I just took on the kind of problems I encountered in the music world I was trying to enter, or the world of artistic production. And I created one of the few works out there that are a female-only music composition. So the collaboration, improvisation, novel forms of notation, social arrangement, that sort of bleeding through of the workshop situation with the performance, casting as a kind of compositional problem. All these things were like made possible through the assertion of this female-only site, which I called the Sheer Frost Orchestra. So that work was, you know, very explicitly drew on feminist strategies of like organization and sociality to come into being. And after doing it once, it has turned out that I've been able to perform it many other times, always with women selected in situ in the place of the invitation. So my work has moved on, but this works is still there and is a kind of resource that I can draw on, perhaps philosophically and conceptually and procedurally, strategically, and so on. Many tentacles flow outward from this original project. But also, as Irene has written about in the Framapad, I'll segue, it also exists out there as a work that essentially does have a kind of a distributed authorship, because there are many people out there who performed in one of these kind of pickup events, and for some reason, perhaps just simply that there are very few single-sex spaces available to women, increasingly so, and those spaces are quite interesting. People who participate in this work have often generated poetry, other forms of writing. They've annotated the scores. I know some of the scores from some of the London versions of the work are in this archive at your institution, and people like to look at them. So that's just just something at the core of my own practice as an artist, an experience that I had, and a kind of sense that almost in spite of myself, something became consolidated around this idea and continues to happen. So like this work had a Swiss premiere this past year, and it will have a Belgian premiere this coming year. So it goes on. But in terms of the Framapad, I would just have to say that I feel that I personally failed to adequately embrace this online tool. I was looking forward to speaking with all of you, but I have thoughts that I neglected to commit to the Framapad, and perhaps I'll be allowed to post, what's the expression? Post facto? Post something. Post panel. It was a hard space for me. I don't like social media that much, although I participate, but it felt like that a little bit.
Thank you, Marina. I think you're not alone in feeling that you personally failed. We all, in some ways, feel that. I had this like dream that this would be this time, creative time, where I'd be able to like chat with everyone on 4 Framapads all at once. And of course, that is not what happened. But I actually I feel really proud of all of us in the sense that we've managed, like in small ways. And it's quite funny for me to see that in every single Framapad, at some point, someone was writing, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'll come back to this, but I have to run." And, you know, like that sense of like really struggling to hear, to like create this space, to like protect this space, a little bit of space to think and to really engage, is something we're all like together in. And everyone, I think probably in like across all 4, we all kind of are leaving this process with a sense of like, I should have done more and I could have done more, and there's so much more to say, which in a way, on the one hand, is maybe frustrating. On the other hand, it's actually a really good thing, because we all want to say more. And perhaps we do come back through the editing process and say, well, you said that in the Framapad, can you expand?
I hope so.
So I think we're all in that space of like, we've started something that we are invested in, but, you know, time and admin and responsibilities and jobs and all that. So here we all are. In any case, so if we can just do the kind of second round, if we could just now actually talk about what we did manage to talk about, having dreamt of all these things that we wanted to say, if you could each sort of point to one or two things that we touched on in the Pramapad that were interesting for you and that you would like to bring to the panel. If we go back to Ximena.
Thank you, Lina. Yes, my 2 points here, and actually will link with you have said again here live in the Pramapad is this idea also brought by Irene about the Pauline Oliveros deep listening giving a balance of the agency between the individual and the collective, and that's something that I experienced quite a lot teaching deep listening, practicing deep listening, and it's not that easy. I will say that in the process of improvisation with the intimal collective, initially, I might say also that they are not necessarily improvisers. They are creative women. They are not all artists. They are not necessarily with sound. There are visual artists. So in this context, I also bring them the idea of improvisation, many ideas of improvisation, guided by my score of listening and voicing. One question that I had is, at some point, one of them said, it's difficult for me to listen to my own voice because I'm listening to others' voices. And that still is a question mark. And it's a question mark a bit what Sora was saying about this space that shapes and is to inspire each other, which that definitely happens in the intimal collective. But at the same time is that probably there are many intentions. So we need to work suddenly in groups. Some of them want to do more probably individual. The nice thing is that we all want to listen. But about how this listening eventually goes to a product that was originally the project, very established times and venues and everything. But once the project is gone, we need other things. We like to meet and we like to listen to each other. But at the same time, I've been dealing with my own rush to have results as whatever, as an artist, as a leader, as a researcher, because also when I'm not in this institutional framework, I'm also trying to flow in what is my new state role. So that is interesting. I think the time, as Sora also was pointing, is interesting in this improvisatory, and is to listen and listen for the time. And I love what Kuda or Sora shared about the social sculpture. So that eventually, by reading your experience, I realized that my work with the intimal collective is the artwork itself. So when I read this idea that, oh, this is a social sculpture, how nice. So just a little call, a little WhatsApp to two of them, to one of them, to the ones who like to do that, with the ones who like to do that. I'm kind of bringing that, and eventually we bring the meeting, and eventually something happens. But my level of stress really went down when about, oh, what will happen? And still there are so many questions, but I think there is to know that it's a purely experimental space and that doesn't have to be fully public, and that we ask all the time, because I think the public makes something hard. You need to show results. And this is when the hard borders start, because they want to play. So do you want to play in a public playground to be seen, to be played, to play? Or do you want just to play in an intimate space? That is what deep listening and the telematic space also provides. Saying that about the virtual space, we are telematic also because we are in distant locations. We deal with migration, and it's part of the texture of what we are sharing. So yes, these points I wanted to expand.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for bringing that. I share a lot of these kind of interests, obviously. But let's move to Zoran next. You're muted, I'm afraid.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So just add talking about the tools, and of course, and including the context of this particular format, then you're using tool for sharing with others. It's interesting. Then not a question. Then you are kind of addict of social media, but it's a necessity. Then some formats we have to build up on that way. So that's why I'm actually mentioned, and this way of collaboration, it's good and enable access and interaction in relation of the current context, what we are doing. But talking about the topic, what you mentioned in sharing thoughts and improvisation, what Ximena now mentioned, I would like to add, and improvisation, it started to be very interesting for me and for our collective meanings of carefully listening each other. We find out then it's starting to be kind of a level of following what other people do. Then it's not a question then we have to impress to each other. Then it's more carefully how the thoughts will melt, and then the direction will change. And that's something then we find out very important to melt with this structure of hierarchy, talking about the idea of the symphonic orchestra from the 19th century structure of capitalism, then to go into the 20th century of completely reconstruct structure. Then it's not necessarily to being the conductor or the musician or the someone from the public, then to recreate the level and how people could participate. And it's also important into this processes of working together, then someone has the right to break or absence and to making step out of it, or just to following the process, and then it become again active in that stuff. So in that terms, it's also changed the dynamics in the group. And specifically when we have something that is crucially change the process, for instance, then we have some kind of intuition what could be the direction, and in the process sometimes happen completely unexpected stuff. So then we could follow those, thoughts then to redirect the whole process, or it's just making a break or reconsolidate what we have to do. And does it the main aim, what we actually mentioned on the beginning, it's really the proper direction. So this is some kind of the process what we find out interesting, testing even ourselves to being in a collective and collectivist processes, talking with people who are not necessarily artists, some kind of autodidacts, or people just came up with some ideas and learning a lot how to managing something or to share some skills. And even then it's create kind of a specific ambient, and we are learning a lot also in collaboration with other people. So it's something then in this process framed period, how it's actually coming up with the agendas of process running. It's something then we are constantly having us on as a beginners in a way. And so we're having kind of next phenomenon and next collaboration, it's becoming kind of a new agenda for all of us. And in that terms, I mean, then in general experience is rising, but something then it's going to be adventure from the very beginning again. And one thing more, which is also very important, then I would, in the preparation of the whole project, I followed, and someone mentioned very strongly a failure of the processes, and I think this is also sometimes starting to be frustrated for the people. But the failure, it's also a question: do we really have to follow, you know, the proper line on the aim? What we take it as a ultimate, you know, stuff, or we have to learn something to it. Sometimes it's actually just simply doesn't work on particular constellation, so it has to be changed a bit or adapt, or, you know, so having this openness to understand and to realize what's going on into the process, sometimes it's very, I mean, helpful in many different ways, and then to smoothly redirect the process and to find the proper direction. So I think this is something then we could learn to that the failure, maybe a wrong word, maybe it's something then it's actually changed the direction, but could be beneficiary on many different ways. It's sometimes I'm just following the thought, you know, that once when you actually got the aim, you completely failed all others, you know. So what is on the all others instead of the main aim? So that's the question. Yeah.
Hey, thank you. Thanks very much. Irene.
Yeah, I slightly stuck with this question of the sort of aim, but I guess I want to go back to what Ximena said, because I had the same point about this kind of origin of the individual and the negotiation between the individual and the collective, and its kind of formative relationship, and producing a very particular kind of collective as well, in the sense that I think what I reflected on when I was reading through both in preparation for tonight, but also at the time, I think all of your thoughts was how the projects that we've all described are working within that paradigm. So that a strong sense of individual authorship and autonomy also produces a strong sense of collective intimacy as well. And in a sense, that's precisely what Lina's doing as well in the overarching structure here. It's absolutely her project, but it's producing this space for us. And I think in what you've described, Ximena, with the Intimal project, and also the sort of question about its continuation without your initial sort of catalyzing role, as it were. And, you know, again, Marina, and clearly in the Sheer Frost Orchestra, that was the very stated intention, to produce community through your work, through your singular work. And I was really struck by this idea, Zoran, that you mentioned of Romism, and whether that fits into this paradigm as well, through this sense of negotiation of being perhaps between things. Yeah, I think that's it.
Great, lots of points that resonate around the room, the virtual room. Thank you. Marina. Muted. I'm shouting at you.
Unmuted. Yeah, you know, I'm struck by there's so many threads here. This problem of both producing the utterance and listening simultaneously to the other utterance, or the many utterances around oneself, is, we have a very good kind of course, that is what a musician does. You cannot play with others and not do either of those things. And that relationship, that kind of agency negotiation also is happening even in improvised music, even with the kind of improvised vocabulary I have used often, which is electronic objects whose outcome from the sonic outcome of a gesture might actually be unknown to me, even though I will make that said gesture with a certain amount of authority and intention and so on. So that this problem of listening is something I'm very interested in, and I have other works which I've explored it even more, specifically like another piece called Teenage Lantana, where young people wear a single headphone of a headphone pair. So they share earbuds between each two people. So they are singing from a score in their ear and listening with the other ear. And my producing that piece several times has also been a kind of research for me into how young people in particular are very adept at a kind of multifocal listening, kind of mediation doesn't perturb them, or, you know, like being plugged into a thing, but also being in a world. And of course, we all experience that even without devices. But so I guess I would just say that my work in particular has been, in a very particular way, has been focused on re-inscribing in material praxis these kind of abstractions that percolate in the domain of philosophy, let's say, or in some case research. So I think like one of the things that I would be interested in the Framapad continuing as an angle of research would be actually like, what is the interaction for artists, which is the position I come from. I'm not an academic person. What is the utility of, or, you know, like, what is this relationship between like research and practice? We live in a moment where actually I think like a lot of concepts coming out of experimental music have been relatively defanged by their adoption and absorption and kind of cannibalization within the academy, where like kind of non-commodity producing forms like improvised music have been sort of subsumed into a discourse economy. And then the artwork itself is this kind of like secondary after effect of the sort of institutionalization of these formerly deracinated or like looser things. So like that, I think that's pretty interesting and sort of complicated to deal with. I love some of what Zoran was sharing initially about how working in the former Yugoslavia and there's like formation of new social forms. I mean, I can't even really compare your experience to mine as an American, where, you know, like I don't even like to, I try not to use the word freedom just as an American. I just want to step off that pedestal because that word is so toxified and weaponized in American political discourse. You know, I'm in the shadow here of the Freedom Tower, you know, so like I can't even go near that word. But also just like the very different stakes involved in a way in the production of forms, you know, in our varying environments that we find ourselves in, I think is another, I guess that would be like my second thing that I think is worthy of, you know, maybe we can learn a lot more from you, all of you.
Thank you, Marina, that's brilliant. So I think at this point we can open to questions. If people want to put their cameras on, that would be really nice so that we see who else is here. I just wanted to, it's too many things to pick up on. You can imagine what has been brought up, but also in the Pramapad. A few things that kind of stood out for me throughout the process. Perhaps maybe the overarching question is, which has been brought up again and again in this discussion, is this kind of tension or kind of shifting space between structure and openness. And I think I'm really interested in the production of this space that kind of happens in between. And I think where we talked about event scores, and Irene has a brilliant quote that appears in her writing, but also in the Pramapad, about the kind of some level of kind of objecthood being kind of almost containing a score or a code for coming together and forms of communities emerging from this. So I'm just really interested in my own curatorial work. I'm always interested in kind of setting up structures, but then stepping away. So kind of, and this is something that came up as well in the Pramapad, like almost like as a score in itself, kind of like giving certain parameters. So the parameter in this case has been, here is this page, let's all write together, we have 2 months, let's see what we can do. And then we kind of come back and kind of discuss and see what happens from that. And in a way, I had lots of things to say. I have my own obsessions, and actually this panel is somehow, maybe mostly, the question that I've been asking throughout my entire curatorial career. This is precisely it. Like, how can you operate in the sphere of art without having an endpoint, or without prescribing too much, or without kind of containing it in an object and in something that then is finished? I'm interested in opening up conversations, not closing them down. And at one point, I sort of mentioned that I get excited about research spaces and galleries and museums more than the exhibition itself, because it kind of opens something up. It's like a box full of like possibilities that opens up lots and lots of directions. And I feel like that about like this project and about other projects I've done, where it's like bringing people together and then sort of opening something up. So I guess this relationship between what are the possibilities, and you've all touched on it in different ways, or that improvisation and kind of coming from improvisatory backgrounds and structures and education and knowledges, what does that afford us? So I guess going back to Marina's sort of bringing up the term freedom from what? So let's, whether we use freedom or whether we use kind of freeing up or liberation or opening up new spaces, but from what? So what are we trying to create? That would be something that I'd kind of want to maybe expand on. Yeah, does anyone want to respond to anything that has been brought up? Does anyone have any questions or comments? Yeah.
Hi, I have one question. Oh, and Bridget, I've just seen you've raised your hand. We'll come to you after. It's slightly adjacent to what we were just discussing, but it was for you, Ximena, and I was just curious about if you could speak a bit more about the relationship between memory and freedom in your work, and how that works in relation to movement, because I think that's traced in different ways through each one of the panelists' practices. Questions of memory, whether that's through kind of collective memory of the performance itself, or the kind of more difficult political memory and political context. I'm thinking in the case of the former Yugoslavia with you, Zoran, as well. Or even, Irene, in your situation, perhaps maybe thinking about kind of longer term DIY kind of cultures and activist groups, and the way that kind of intergenerational memory is passed between people when they work together. But I wondered, if you could speak about that in relation to your collective practice.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for that question. So the intimal system, the technology that I prototyped, and it was precisely to bring together all these fragments in an exercise of collective memory by improvising, free improvisation. free improvisation that also has, let's say, a score that is to navigate by walking and rotating across 4 spheres of migratory memory. And also by listening to oral archives of other Colombian migrant women who have been forced to leave Colombia because of the conflict. So we had so many materials in the performance during the research project. After that, as a solo or freelance artist or, well, solo worker, I try to bring all these technology venues into an app, the Intimal app, which now it has, let's say, is there, is available, and I use it in the workshops. So the big question is, because this app to work, you have to walk, you have to go outside. So that is starting to respond the freedom of what? In my case, is movement. So I use the migratory journey as an embodied metaphor. And I've been doing telematic performances during many years, basically between venues and using sound in this way in which we are. So we are sitting. So my freedom is about mobility. That's the freedom that I propose, but also about certain structures, for example, dialogical structures. So we have this idea of real-time response. So the app doesn't necessarily, the app brings people together and they feel that they are with others, but also they have their individuality and they can respond, and then you find the response of the other, and then you feel free to respond or not. And what I found first, when I first tested the app with pre-recorded material from the original Intimal group, I found that all these things that I did for many months suddenly happen in half hour with other women. So my big question now is that the structure called technology, embodied technology, has the potential of bringing collectives, because after that we went for a lunch and people who didn't, some of them knew each other, but others no. And there was lots of talks about every single thing for a long time. So I was just, 1 second, it was just this interaction. I offered deep listening workshops for 2 hours, 3 hours, but this was 30 minutes. And it was the technology and it was the embodiment. So I have questions about how technology and layers of technology can also contribute to that. So with the collective also, there is WhatsApp, and suddenly someone starts a conversation, and it's a bit, so I think it's about layers, and the collective memory is an exercise that is transformative. It's and all these layers of technology also bring together. Suddenly someone brings a song. Suddenly now we have elections in Colombia. So or there was a strike. There are terrible things happening. There are feelings, emotions. But now we know that there is something called Intimal, and that there is a place to share our collective memory. Some of us are in UK, some of other people in very different countries, which is difficult to share that. So we have this, and we have called that another Colombia. We have created a different territory.
Mhm.
I just noted, thanks so much, that's so interesting. I just thought, I just noted that Bridget's hand was raised and also Carolina's. Bridget, maybe I think that you were first.
Sure. I guess my question kind of goes back to something Marina said earlier, and I would, like to bring it back to this question of technology, Ximena, that you're pointing to, is like the question between the relationship between research and practice, and in terms of like writing about collectives and historicizing collaborative work, and how to bring like that question of methodology into the very practice of writing, because writing is such a, especially like in academia and scholarship, is always recognized as created by an individual. And Irene, you're speaking or spoke about that relationship between the individual and the collective, and how, you know, an artist or curator can bring people like into conversation with one another. And so I'm just thinking about, how do you like kind of recreate that environment in writing, in like writing about a collective? Because that seems like such a difficult part of historicizing collaborative work, right? That it ultimately gets refracted again through like the individual author who's separate from the collective, maybe not always. But then kind of going back to that question of like how collectives now, like with technology, you know, like this and others panel is possible, or, you know, people are able to come together to think about these questions because of, you know, the technology that we have. And why is writing as a technology seeming so far behind in some way in terms of keeping up with like the ability to collaborate? And maybe this isn't a problem that the individual ultimately writes histories, but it seems like it is. And that talking about collectives and collectivity especially brings the problem of biases when writing. So yeah, I'm just super curious to hear from all of you what you think about this and the writer's relationship to, you know, the curator, the artist, artists working together. Yeah.
Fantastic question. I mean, I can just say something very briefly about, well, actually what I would say is that those precise questions are why I think having a project like this is an attempt to intercept or subvert or disturb that, because I think in addition to there being a writer who is usually after the fact, sometimes at the same time, but often after the fact, writing and historicizing the work of a collective, you first of all, you have that individual, usually individual writer, but you also end up having either one individual from the collective, the kind of the voice or the most prominent member, or several, but that's precisely the problem. Who is that voice? Who has even the possibility to speak? Because let's face it, and this is something that was really important for me in this discussion, which is the kind of the durational aspect of it, because the kind of, it's all very kind of enthusiastic and dynamic at the beginning of collectives, but then give it 10 years and you will have members who are no longer present, no longer in communication, conversation, interested, able to, so that the kind of history is slimmed down, right? They become kind of very narrow. So you have the individual author, you have the fact that the hegemonic art and kind of cultural institution wants names. It wants simple authors, simple crediting, simple sales, right? After the fact. So this is so where you kind of complicate the writing and the histories. We tend to kind of slim them down and make them and simplify them over time. And I think that's precisely why kind of countering that with new methodologies that hopefully we are developing. By the way, at this point, I should say that I completely stole this model from kuda.org, crediting, because during lockdown, they had a fantastic collaborative writing process that I was involved in. I mean, stole. We have been talking for a long time, let's put it that way. But that was the most meaningful experience I had during lockdown. It was amazing. We all wrote together. It was a little bit different, the final outcome, but it was different software. But I think the more kind of initiatives like that we have, the more we intercept and disrupt art historical canons. So that doesn't answer how, but it answers how we might begin to imagine how we might do it. But please, who wants to answer after my too long response?
I could just add something, since that was partly address to my comment. I would say that from your question, I got the sense that partially what you were asking about was the kind of solitary nature of writing itself and the sense of being alone. And I'm very interested in what Lina just articulated about like thinking in the long term, because I think a participation in the, if we all in our different ways want to see the history of the present inscribed in new and improved ways that don't eliminate everyone but the loudest person in the room or the one with the most kind of cultural valence, then actually we do actually have to sit alone at times and do these solitary tasks like writing these pieces and writing these histories and so on. And those things are solitary, but they're not necessarily not part of a collective, longer term communitarian approach to one's area. So like this idea of sharing fragments of writing back and forth and so on, if one could become accustomed to it, is not I would see it as like not replacing the lone struggle, which we all have. I guess I could just trying to say like something about, taking one for the team, kind of like you have to put that awful time in alone in order to join the group with to make your contribution. I'm not sure that's what the question was about.
I just spotted Carolina, your hand was also raised, and I know that Zoran, you were about to speak a minute ago as well. I was curious to hear about how the collaborative practice that you put together came into form too, but maybe Carolina, I'll pass.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So instead of posing the question, maybe I refer to this interesting question that was posed in the collaborative spirit. Maybe I see that writing is a technology, and when we talk about solitary writing, it's also each text. It's a response, right? So in a sense, it's not writing; it's speaking with always. And I would not blame my beloved technology for that. It's rather infrastructures that are, the academic infrastructure and how the way of distributing writing and how is it going to be shared further. But the actual picking up the topic, it's always talking with others. It's never solitary in a sense, right? In an academic way, in a more let's say rigid way with all the footnotes, but obviously in any other formal informal way, it's always talking to and talking with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good point. And I think it's worth remembering that sometimes when we are doing that painful work of being on our own, it is a lovely thought to think that you are talking with, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels very much kind of solitary, doesn't it? Zoran, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I would just mark, then we're talking and mentioned the freedom, and all these aspects of collectivist process. First of all, I think then maybe we could just mark here, then we're talking about, okay, I will start from visual arts and from where I'm coming from, but basically we're talking about the market, and this market create kind of proper formats or kind of tradition formats of communication in a way. So even in academia, you can find markets as well. And then I think then when we mention freedom, we're talking about against reproduction in a way. So I think that this is actually the way step out of this reproducting stuff. And then it's a question how we could create innovative aspects so as I mentioned this process of improvisation to having rights to break or absence. It's also in this process of working together, it's something then right to make mistake in a way. I mean, from the history of art, we can find it a lot of cases, then it's actually come up from mistakes, you know, and then it just changing the crossroads and then go through another direction, which is completely changes the whole shape. And I think this is something then you have to learn on that way, then to create kind of an atmosphere, then you are having possibility, maneuver space to really trace it, not to be, you know, in a frame of it to lead just to the aim. And talking about the processive collective, it's also a question of, are they everyone in this process able to make mistakes, or are they feel comfortable into it? Or in our cases, we also find some processes when we was having kind of difficult times, let's say, then some of people actually jump into the project, like it to be in the process, but then, you know, during the process, they realize that they simply need kind of stronger structure in a way. And it's having kind of unpleasant, you know, parts. So it's immediately produce kind of internal relations in a process of creation. And it's happen. That's part of the, you know, personal, you know, personality aspects of habits of persons and how they would like to express this, or are they able to stop with it, or just step out of the process, or having a credit to continuing into it. So it's kind of a lot of kind of prejudice. Then you have to assume and to really play with it. And I think this is something. Then we have to find a way. Then technology is just turning to that. It's just a tool, and of course, then it's not neutral. It's something. Then we find out working with technologies, just believed in a concept of politics of free software, and it's following the free software agenda, then to just getting through into the relations of collective, you know, atmosphere. And it's not a question of when you Lina mentioned, then instead of the timeline and how it's actually prolonged some process. Talking about the collective work, it's something then we have to divide it. What means then specifically art group, then it likes to having as a label of the group, then runs for the particular practice. And it's also a question, are they, you know, having kind of a long career, or how they're managing with it? Because in history of our groups, we could actually mention just group which is actually being just in a year, and in this year they produce a lot, you know. And then the legacy of this year is actually provide in many different formats and kind of other procedures, which is come up very productive. On the other hand, you know, collectivists, it could be also produce kind of long-term process of melting or changing, or it's having this, that we call it like shaping the social sculpture in that way. And then on the opposite side of on this arch, we can find it, you know, very pragmatical, you know, like almost like a business structure. Then people actually provide, you know, regulations, then they have to, you know, keep each other just to be successfully in a business, again related to the market, because they just follow the rules. And this is something then we just have to find ourselves, you know, where we are in this scale, you know, where we are going to, you know, just to reproduce or to participate in a proper regulate market already, you know, or we are going to against this, or finding some kind of different formats of criticizing that, or to against the status quo.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add that perhaps it's worth, maybe not now and maybe not here, but this is, you know, this question of collectives. We're talking about so many different forms, so many different ways of working together. And I think what interests me is perhaps this, to sort of, I guess in this panel, to contrast the kind of collectivity, the way we think of it within, let's say, contemporary, modern contemporary art, with the way we might think of collectivity in music, where it's, you know, much more about working, like creating something together without a particular end point in time. So if you're part of an orchestra, you're not part of an orchestra just for 3 months or 6 months. You're part of an orchestra for a long time, hopefully. And I'm also kind of interested in how, going back to the former Yugoslavia, this idea that the way a lot of collectives came together is to question the very role of art in society. What is the role of art in society? And with Yugoslav politics and self-management, the question of the artists was sort of put in parallel with this idea that the worker was the subject. The worker was the subject of Yugoslav society. So Yugoslav society was effectively there for the needs of the worker, and self-management grew from that. And those principles that were at the center of collectivizing in Yugoslav times are something that I think perhaps may be repeated in these kind of questions that we are now trying to articulate. Of course, at the time, there was no market. There was no art market. So it was a kind of the set of questions was very, very different. Perhaps some of the successes of those collectives are related to the idea that you could ask these questions over and over again in many different ways. So I think just this question of what does it mean to even talk about collectives is enormous, because, you know, we're talking about everything from, you know, art and language to, you know, whatever, whoever today is calling themselves a collective. Does anyone want to respond to many things that have come up?
I would like to respond to what you just said, but is this about the positioning of the collective? And one, I mean, the context of the former Yugoslavia and the society, I'm thinking of the context of Colombian society post-conflict, and now again the discourse of peace, which we feel desperately wanted to help. So, and deep listening, coming back, is this, again, this balance between the inner and the outer. So now there is the role that artists are really essential for the process of peace, yeah? And then you feel extreme responsibility. And then there is, so there, but the space of intimal, and what I have learned again with deep listening and Pauline Oliveros and all the legacy of Pauline Oliveros, Ione, and Heloise Gold, is how important is work the inner space, because if we don't have this, what is the outcome that whatever it is, the market or the society or the peace process or the war or the environment or all these things that we need to save the planet right now, how that is manageable if we don't have this inner. And I think that also is a lot to do with the private and the public. So I think in terms of improvisatory performance, when you bring the orchestra, it's how nice to have the orchestra and my friends who play just here at home. Yeah, we don't have to go there to the public venue. Not yet. There will be a moment. And this is what actually Nina's on item talks about, this, the thick event. The thick event is the performance, what happens, but everything that goes after, before and during and after is about vibration. So it's how to keep the vibration going. And I think that applies also bringing the writing. So I with the collective, we have brought, I have this thing about the researcher writing about what they said in a very ethnographic way. But during the process also, we published together a fanzine that was 2 open pages for each person. And we say, make your state of presence. Some of them draw, some of them wrote, whatever they wanted. And now this article that I put in the Pharmapad for a magazine. So that was the first kind of 3-hand, kind of, or multiple hands, but 3 editors writing together. And of course, that has the issues that any writing together has, but we did manage. It's not magic and it's not simple and it's not free of conflict, but is the work. Is the work, and it's just to keep listening, I think, and to keep different layers of possible publications with the possibilities that we have.
Thank you. Any other comments from anyone actually, or from the speakers? Carolina? Sorry, Carolina, was that?
Yes, I can. I would like to ask a question, but it's not a follow-up question. Is it okay to?
Yes.
I have a very simple question. Is improvisation in singular? So it's something like that everybody knows, because I don't really know much about improvisation. And is it something like in singular that you know what improvisation is? And if so, is it a model of certain kind of collectivity that this kind of open, right? Or as you said, the time not yet. So this experimental space, let's say. If you could respond to this simple question.
It's a great question. Who would like to answer that? Marina?
Can say something about that. I didn't understand the question, the language of the question. Is improvisation singular? What was the word there?
Oh, you're muted,
You're
Carolina.
muted.
What I mean by that is improvisation, like, is there many different ways of improvisation, or is improvisation just this what we all have in our common sense, or is there something more? Is there many different ways of thinking about improvisation? And if improvisation is only this common thing that we think, is it just a model of the open experimental space, not yet time, when we can speak about public and private and
Well, I mean, it's just a word, so it has more than one usage, obviously, and it's probably somewhat culturally specific. In English, in American English, it's both an abstract concept and it refers to a kind of art, or a set of quite broadly different practices in art. But I was just reminded of I did a panel discussion a few years ago called Improvisation in Daily Life, and it was headed up by George Lewis, who has written extensively about improvisation in music, history of jazz, and Arthur Jaffa, and the painter Amy Silman and me. It was really quite memorable, but I think the conclusion we came to was that it's many things in many contexts, but that yes, improvisation draws on, and I have used this concept, which I sourced to a certain extent to George Lewis in my own work, that improvisation is a vernacular form that comes out of our agency as actors, agents in a collective space. And it cannot not be that. But then it can also be a lot of other things, including, it can become ossified as a genre or practice within a specific subgenre of music or art. But at its core, I think it is about engaging with one's agency and that of others, So that is why, of course, it does lend itself to becoming a metaphor and many other things. I'll stop there and let someone else who can speak better about this take over.
I just wanted to add a very small thing in response to Carolina. For me, the why these questions are important comes back to something Marina said earlier, which is this idea that you make a sound, but you may not hear that sound. you know, metaphorically speaking. So your gesture may kind of come together or combines with other gestures, whether it's a sound or a brushstroke or a movement, and it goes beyond yourself. You may not even know what your particular individual input is. And I think there's something very different in that. And that's what makes me want to talk and think about these questions, that kind of loss of self, loss of individuality or individualism in a kind of collective, which I think is something that's specific to perhaps improvisation and kind of iterative practices. And that's I can't quite get to it, but I think that loss of being able to know how you as an individual perfectly fit in this bigger you know, entity, that's really important, that loss of individual gesture. Who would like to follow on from that? And then perhaps we should draw it to a close, because we are going on a bit too long.
Yeah, I just had one question kind of on the back of that for Irene, which was about the women's work score and the publication that was at the basis of your PhD. And I just wondered if there was any, I mean, I understand that's not improvisational work, but I just wondered if there was anything more that you could say about that in relation to the publication of that score, and then also the way that that circulated as an object afterwards, and what happens when you work with that kind of historical material, unearthing something in that way.
I guess
Sorry.
that's quite a big question. I mean, but I think the scores, lots of those scores are structures for improvising, though, which, you know, comes back to, it's very sort of a piece with Oliveros' work in the early 70s that begat deep listening as well. I'm not sure I quite have the question.
I was just wondering whether or not there was a connection between that publication and improvisation in and of itself. Thinking about Carolina's question, I suppose, too, about structural questions of what constitutes an improvisation for someone who's newer to the practice, and the kind of formal remits of what an improvisation, the formal shape an improvisation might take. And just thinking about that in relation to what Lina was just saying about the kind of necessary dissolution of self in the context of that kind of collective work, and I suppose if there was a connection there in some way.
I mean, I think for me, what's interesting, particularly about scores, which goes back to sort of the event score, you know, or even back to Cage, is that it still inscribes a singular authorship, right? And so that in that sense, it's, in an overarching sense, it's not improvisation, it's very distinct. You know, there is usually a very distinct aesthetic, sonically or otherwise, that's produced from a particular score. But I think there's a strong interest within that for improvisation within those structures. So it's more like that they would be ways of creating structures for improvising, or that might be a sort of compositional tactic within some of those composers' practice, setting up certain moments of improvisation or certain sort of ways of notating that produce that. So yeah, maybe that's sort of all I would say about that. I mean, it's definitely distinct than sort of free improvisation or jazz. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Oh yeah, just pass to Ximena.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring again, the Pauline Oliveros improvisation. The most simple is give and receive, and that is the shortest, simple, and powerful score that she has. Give sound, receive sound. It's basically this give sound, so you are aware of what you are giving, so the individual. And then when you receive sound, so it becomes the unselfing that Lina was talking. Because to receive, you have to empty your vessel otherwise you cannot receive. But then these receiving sound inform what you are going to send, and the marks in between are usually breathing. So there are spaces, let's say silences or breathing. And also there is another that is surprise. So what you did was surprise. It's like, can I ask something that is not in the context, that has not been proposed? I just want to say that also a very key part of improvisation. So I think this hour, all this, although there is a score that was provided by Lina somehow, a structure, but the rest, so what we have done here is improvise, and is listening based, improvise. And I think that applies not only for sound improvisation, if we were with instruments and everything, but it's for all arts and for the everyday life.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think it also relates to another point that was made earlier about this, like our maybe inability to listen now, and how like multiple sources, and in some instances that can be, it's fine, but in like technology and being in an actual space, but also I really feel that this kind of ability to listen and receive and empty your vessel, as you say, is something that's we like look at the cultural overproduction that we're constantly struggling with, like how many things we want to do and go to and all of this. And I think that's where the kind of the listening element is so important, I think. So I think we've kind of run over by 15 minutes. I hope that's okay. So I think we should draw it to a close. I would just like to thank everyone who asked brilliant questions, and above all, thank our panel who have been writing and thinking, and also it's great to kind of pull together some of these issues. So thank you, Ximena, Zoran, Irene, and Marina, and thank you to Kat as well. And I just want to say, so where we go next is some of us, a self-selected editorial group, will be working on all of this, the Pramapad content and the kind of transcript of these panels towards a publication that will eventually, hopefully, kind of see the light of day, online and offline, we hope. And we have one more panel in the series, which is on the 1st of December, and that's entitled The Third Hand. And we are investigating collaboration in the sense of groups who create a new entity. So create another artist, a fictional artist, and kind of their actual individual selves kind of are actually not visible, like from the Guerrilla Girls to Claire Fontaine or Bernadette Corporation. So a very particular strategy, a very deliberate strategy, which is a little bit different to anything we've talked about so far. So I hope to see some of you there, and all the information is on the project website. So thank you and have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Hi. it's just you and me. I'm gonna stop the recording.
I can't help myself. I'm still here.
Okay, stop.
Yeah.